Hello, I'm Meghna Chakrabarti, Brookline mom, and I am very, very pleased and honored to be able to sit at this table with these distinguished educational leaders and have a conversation about how do you create schools that help every student thrive. Every student thrive. And before we start and before I have these gentlemen actually introduce themselves, I want to say two quick things. One is that I am here as a Brookline mom of two that are in our schools, and I am not here in my professional capacity as a journalist at WBUR. And also, I actually just rushed here from work, so please forgive the peak mom look I've got going on. Had to organize getting some kids to where they needed to be, a dog that was at the vet, etc. So forgive the appearance today. But that all being said, I'd actually love to have the three of you introduce yourselves, and then we'll get right into it, starting.
Sure. Hi, my name is Ramon Gonzalez. I'm a professor of the practice at Boston University. But before that, I was a school administrator for 22 years in New York City.
Hi, I'm Adrian Mims. I'm the founder and CEO of the Calculus Project. I worked at Brookline High School for 19 years. Started out as a medical tutor, summer school director, full-time math teacher, associate dean, and dean of students.
Hi, I'm Bob Weintraub. I've spent about 40 years working in the trenches of our public schools, and I was the headmaster of Brookline High School for 19 years. And I'm running for school committee in Brookline right now.
As I like to say, it is Bob's face that's frozen in carbonite in the front entrance to Brookline High School.
That's right. That's my Han Solo imitation. I got a bas-relief of me in the atrium. They named it after me, and I told everybody that in about 100 years I'm going to unfreeze myself and come back and be the head of the school again.
So actually, I want to start by having each of you answer this question, but I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. What if you had to pick one thing? I know education is complicated and it's complex and there's many factors, but if you had to pick one thing that you think is absolutely essential to create schools that help every child thrive, what would it be? Go ahead.
Okay, I wasn't sure which way you were
Mr.
going.
Gonzalez, go ahead.
Sure. I think everyone being on the same mission, same a shared vision of a school. I think that's critical to have a school believe that they can have every child exceed and is willing to provide whatever support is needed. But there has to be that shared vision across the school, and that takes good leadership to be able to get everyone involved in that shared vision.
Dr. Mims?
Yeah, I would add to that, making sure parents have a seat at the table. Too often parents are excluded for one reason or another. But when you think about education, parents are the first teachers for children. And so schools should also make sure that parents are heavily involved, because a lot of parents feel like they're left out and they don't have the support to, help their children at home.
Dr. Bob.
Yeah. So I used a lot of mantras when I was a school leader. And one of my favorite, and I think an important one, is every child needs a dignified next step, which obviously is different for the different variety of kids who go from grade to grade to grade and then graduate. I think that you have to, if we buy that, if we say every kid has to have a dignified next step, going from 4th grade, 5th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, graduate from high school, we have to operationalize that concept of a dignified next step, which means you have to try to individualize the school for every kid, because they're all so different and they all come to us with different abilities and talents. And so I think if we organize a school to achieve that mantra, to achieve that goal, at least we have a good start. And then, of course, the work to get a dignified next step for every kid is hard work.
So dignified next step, parents at the table, unity of vision. So can we pick up on vision? How does a school leader do that? I mean, because it's one of those things which is so, on the face of it, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But to activate that unity, it's pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think the leader has to be honest about getting in there, rolling up his sleeve, and being willing to listen. I think that listening piece is what our teachers want, our staff wants, and then to follow through on what they've learned from those discussions. I think once that community is developed, that people, you have a shared willingness to listen and be involved in problem solving, I think then you can start talking about, okay, now how do we set goals to continue this discussion and then look at outcomes. If everybody is focused on the same purpose, I think you will see people almost like snowballing, willing to put out more and be able to listen more. It just builds on top of each other. Once you sort of have those quick wins that people are being listened to.
Okay, actually, so that is a perfect segue into the question I wanted to ask you, because speaking as a parent, sometimes I feel that obviously parents, as you put it so beautifully, are their children's first teachers, so there's huge influence at home. But Brookline specific, and you have many years of experience here, there seems to sometimes be some friction between like how much parents would like to be involved with schools and what the schools may feel is realistic. So when you say seat at the table, like what exactly does that mean?
Well, I think sometimes that tension comes from lack of communication or just poor communication. And I think that as educators, and I use my situation with the Calculus Project as an example, the first thing we do is send letters to the parents and have info sessions. I mean, 95% of the kids don't come running to us to say they want to do math during the summer. They come because their parents tell them they have to be there. Yeah. And then once they show up, it's our job to make sure that they love it and they have connections and that they're learning math and they're building their confidence and that they're going to be successful. But part of that info session is helping students and their parents to understand the why. What are the benefits? I honestly believe that all parents want the best for their children. Some people, you just don't know what you don't know, but it's up to us to be effective communicators and create that compelling reason for their children to be with us during the summer. And schools have to.
It occurred to me, we should take a second. You should talk about what the Calculus Project is, because there may be some people who don't know about it. You should, though.
Well, the Calculus Project, we're a nonprofit. We work with school districts to help dramatically increase the number of Black, Hispanic, low-income students succeed in advanced mathematics, so they are placed on a trajectory to take calculus their senior year, because we know students who are taking calculus their senior year have greater post-secondary opportunities and specifically are better prepared to pursue 4-year degrees or 2-year degrees in STEM. And so there are multiple components that we implement in a school district over the course of 5 to 6 years to make this happen.
You started it in Brookline.
Started it in Brookline, and both of my children, my son begrudgingly, participated in the Calculus Project, and as well as my daughter.
And my oldest grandson is in the Calculus Project right now.
Okay, so Bob, I'm going to ask you, Dr. Bob, excuse me, because I just cannot avoid asking you some questions about the role of a school committee.
Oh.
In this, right? Because the schools, by default, building leadership has a close working relationship with district leadership, and district leadership, theoretically, is beholden or responsible to the school committee, which represents the town. So in talking about these most important things that you've all described, are needed to make a school that helps every child thrive, or school system, what's the role in the school committee to grow those aspects?
Right. Leadership matters. We all know that. And the kind, I'll get to the school committee in a second. The kind of leadership that I think works, the kind of leadership that I've experienced and also practiced, is when the leader pays close attention to the folks who are actually doing the work on the ground. So in the school system, we're talking about teachers, counselors, social workers, paraprofessionals, the folks who work with the kids every day. The message to them is not do it this way. And we're now, we're closer to what school committees are talking about. The message is to not tell them what to do. The message is, how can I help you? What do you need? And that should be an ongoing relationship between the leaders of the school system and the practitioners in the schoolhouse. Okay, so school committee, there's 9 people on the school committee, and their major responsibility is to hire and supervise and evaluate the superintendent of schools. So the superintendent of schools is the leader, and in my life I've been fortunate to work with so many good superintendents who actually embrace what I just said. I founded a magnet school in Lowell to desegregate the city, and I worked with some really visionary and amazing superintendents too, and they would always say, Bob, what do you need? What do you need? You feel empowered when someone says that to you, And I used to walk the halls of Brookline High and say, Adrian, what do you need today? How you doing? What do you need? What can I do for you? It's called servant leadership. School committee should be that. I believe the school committee should work with the superintendent and make sure that the culture of the school system reflects what I was talking about in terms of honoring and celebrating the work of the teachers, of the counselors, of the social workers, of the custodians, of the secretaries, of the cafeteria workers. That creates a family. And so, the school committee is really the top of the organizational chart, and they have to work with the school committee, with the superintendent, to try to create that kind of culture.
I promise I'll come back to the two of you in just a second, because I have some very important questions for you as leaders. Frankly speaking, Dr. Baum,
Yes.
this sounds like a lot of cheerleading, which may not necessarily be what a district needs. I can understand from a human level, yes, but when there's a critical mass of folks that are worried that their schools have kind of drifted off from what their original Brookline, you've used this word a lot. This school district used to be considered a lighthouse.
Absolutely.
Of education in Massachusetts. I don't know, that bulb seems a little dimmer to me now. So is cheerleading the district enough for a school committee to do, or maybe something a little more proactive?
Well, it's funny that you use the word cheerleading, because when I first came to Brookline High School, one of the teachers said, "What's the story with this guy? He thinks he's a cheerleader." She used that term because I would try to get everybody excited and say, "This is the best place in the world. This is the lighthouse. We have a responsibility to keep that light bright," and I don't think a lot of the faculty was used to that cheerleading. I said, "Listen, we have a responsibility to polish the mystique of this school. The school has a great reputation, and we have to continue to polish the mystique." And so, yes, I believe that I was a cheerleader. I used to tell the kids every year, the new ninth graders came, and I made a speech to all of them. I said, "I just want you to know how lucky you are to be at Brookline High School," because
I gotta pick on him. I'm so sorry. I promise I'll come back to No, but Bob, this really matters. This really matters because all of the 3 things that you have accurately identified that's needed to help create a school system where every child thrives, there are impediments to creating that culture, okay? And I fear that one of the impediments is in Brookline, we got really good at talking about how good we are and stopped paying as much attention to, were we as good as we said we are? And here's why. Speaking of Brookline High School, was it, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, you correct me, but in those US News
Mhm.
World Report rankings, I know big asterisks, everyone has their criticisms of it, but I think we're in the top 5 in the state of Massachusetts.
Always the top 10, couple times.
Yeah, but now it's down in the 30s. Okay, so if whether or not you believe in standardized testing as a way to measure a school, I'm looking at Brookline High in comparison to itself.
It's more complicated than testing. There's a lot of ingredients going into
There's
those rankings.
there's college readiness,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah.
But again, the high school in comparison to itself.
The high school is a great place. I spent some time there. I love that place. I love the teachers. I love the leaders of the school. I hired most of them. And I think that, I love to be, I'm a very competitive person. I love to be number 1. I love to be in the top 10. And I don't freak out at number 34 or number 27. As long as we feel that let's say the high school, as long as we feel it's doing what we were talking about in terms of being a great school, taking care of all the kids, having a dignified next step for them. One of the practices that I encouraged, I still do, in terms of teachers, to say to sort of to embrace the dignified next step thing. Well, you have to get there. So what do? You say to the kids, sort of organizationally, you're important. What you're doing here is really important. Your schooling. We believe in you. You can do this. We're going to help you, and we're going to celebrate your success. So those 5 things, they really come from John Safier, who's a major national teacher trainer and teacher professional development person. He's a wonderful guy. Anyway, so that's what I think, that message has to be communicated by everybody in the school. This is important. You're important. You can do this. We're going to help you, and we're going to celebrate.
Okay, so back to, with that in mind, I'm going to come back to him, don't worry. But again, thinking about the students, right? Obviously, they are the people that matter. And again, just being a Brookline mom, I personally believe that our district can do better. And one easy way to measure that is there's always a lot of talk about equity, okay? But by one metric, again, these metrics are imperfect, but by one metric in terms of standardized test scores, Brookline hasn't really budged all that much, right? And so maybe is it time for us to sort of find a better definition of what we mean by equity so that we can then more purposefully and practically meet that definition, really do something about it. So how would you define what equity actually is?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Dr. Gonzalez.
I would actually probably take a step back, and I'd wonder, what do the students think? Do they feel? And I think that's a missing step on these conversations around equity, is that we talk about the adults, we really ask students how they feel, how they see themselves in the world. What's their purpose? What's their voice? Do they feel fulfilled? We save that for later on in life, but this is a great age to start having those discussions. And I think as students become more aware of their role in the world, I think you'll have that self-advocacy start to develop. And so I think I would like to hear that discussion as well, of how kids see themselves, how they see themselves in the community, how they see themselves in the world. And then as we get to that conversation, I think then we can really talk about equity, because then we understand if needs are being met. Mm. But if all the needs are being met from the top down, meaning test scores and the things that adults maybe are looking at, that still doesn't mean that kids are happy. Still doesn't mean that kids feel a sense of empowerment. And so I would always like to see, what does that look like at the school? And I think once we start to address those needs, I think we will see shifts in school. I would love, to me, the measure of success of a school, do kids want to leave at the end of the day? Mm. Are the kids want to fight to stay in that school, find things to do? Then I know that's an exciting place to be. But when kids are saying, I'm racing out to school before the teachers, before that 2:30 bell or 3 o'clock bell, I'm a little worried about how kids feel about whether they see themselves as a real role a stakeholder in
Yeah.
the school, or are we just talking about adults?
So you said something really interesting about are the needs of every kid
Mm.
being met. Those needs aren't going to all be the same.
Right, right.
Talk more about that.
Well, I think that's why we need to have that conversation with students. And that does require some challenging students, as well as supporting them. And I mean, challenge them on their thoughts, their beliefs, and having kids able to articulate, because then they can advocate for themselves. Otherwise, we're building a compliant pool of students if we don't have them want to think about where they see themselves in the world and how they want to reach that. As we have those conversations, then we could talk about needs, because then we can identify needs. Otherwise, we're having kids who identify needs that are really not about them, but about what's around them.
Yeah. So what I hear behind this is like how do we create a school culture, operations, just even like in the DNA of how our schools run, so that the fullest potential of every child is like unleashed.
Mm.
Is that an overly romantic way of putting it?
No, I mean, that's the North Star,
Yeah.
as I see it. But I agree with what Ramon said. I'm just going to add a little different spin on it. Equity, to me, is giving each student what he or she needs. Here lies the problem. You have people and you have a finite amount of resources. So that's the perception that there are a finite amount of resources. And when you talk about equity, giving certain groups or students what they need, there is a mindset for some people that you can't give these other people what they need, whether it's students in special education, whether they're students who are multilingual, that you can't give them what they need to be successful and have a seat at the table without taking from the students who are benefiting the most. And it's very political in some regards, and it requires strong leadership. I'm going to brag about Bob a little bit because Bob did some things that were very courageous, that was in the spirit of equity. I can run down a whole list because I worked with this guy for 19 years. But one of the things he did, he created pathways and access for students to take AP courses. There were all types of barriers that heads of the department put in place for students, that they had to overcome these barriers to get a seat in AP courses. Bob said, no, we're going to make sure the students have unfettered access to seats in these classes. And the perception was it was going to destroy the reputation of the school. AP scores were going to go down. However, AP scores stayed the same, and there were a couple of spikes, and we had more students there in the classroom. Bob created a tutorial, and that was about giving students what they needed to reach their highest potential. And everything that Bob did, and with the Calculus Project as well, there was always tension. There was always pushback. And it took steady, courageous leadership to say, no, this is the right thing to do. We're gonna do it. I'll listen to you. Going back to what Ramon said, I will listen to you. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna make the final decision, and I expect you to honor it and fall in line. And the last thing I just wanna say too, that's really the importance of having the right core values in the school district and having a strategic plan, because that's what's going to anchor those decisions. And those decisions should always be made with students in mind. And one last thing, I just gotta mention this, because Bob ticked off a lot of department heads on this. When I was at Brookline, we'd have new students come to the district, and the head of the departments had these things they call lids. They didn't want to exceed more than 25 students in the classroom. And so the department heads, they get on email, they get on the phone, and they're like, well, this section has 25 kids. We can't put this kid in this section, and going back and forth. Meanwhile, while this is going on, new students to the district would sit in the hallway sometimes 2 days, 3 days, and not have a complete schedule. Bob saw that and he did something about it. He came up with this little catchphrase, kids before lids. He's like, I don't want to see this mess. I don't want to see these kids sitting here without a schedule. Kids before lids. And they got ticked off. And schools are for children, right? And why was this even an issue? I didn't care about lids. You can put 40 kids in my class. I don't care. I like kids, you know? Not saying that the teachers didn't like kids, but for me, it's about that steady leadership to say, this is who we are, this is who I am, and this is what we're about. And we talk too much, I think, about curricula, moving the needle and moving schools. We need to, focus on that, but we also have to focus on courageous leadership, because this doesn't happen without ticking a few people off and getting things done.
Thanks for that commercial.
You're welcome.
For my school committee run. Thank you, Adrian.
I feel like Karl Rove, kind of like the.
He was also known as Darth Vader, so I'm sure you want to go down that path.
This is a joke. He's the only one I can think of.
I saw him once, and I honestly heard like the theme song of The Empire in my head. But Bob, what does strike me is thus far, all, if not all, most of the examples that we've talked about are happening like at the school level, right? I mean, district leadership, of course, is important because, to your point, they're setting the vision, right? But the actual progress is made at the schools, right?
100%.
And so, I mean, do we talk about that enough when we're trying to really understand in this day and age what is equity, so that we can like define it and get there?
To me, educational equity is not a complicated thing, okay? And to me, educational equity is the calculus project. It's as simple as that, where you take a look at kids who haven't performed, over the groups of kids who haven't performed as well as we want them to, and you put them in a situation where there's very, very powerful academic programs that, without intervention, without an intentional response, without taking a look and saying, you're not going to get there unless we help you in this particular way. So the calculus project, beginning at the end of 7th grade, says we expect you to graduate high school and complete calculus and take the AP calculus exam in the 12th grade. That's like 5 years from now. And in order to get you there, this is what we're going to do. And Adrian talked a teeny bit about what the actual calculus project is. It's pre-teaching in the summer, so when the kids get into the high-level math classes in the fall, they've already got a head start. It's tutoring during the entire school year, 3 days a week after school. The kids have an academic center they can go to. There's the Pride curriculum, where kids of color interact with very, very successful STEM professionals, scientists, professors, entrepreneurs in industry. They come to the school. The kids go to universities, go to the corporations, and just continue that through 5 years, where the message is, you can do this, we're going to help you, and you're going to succeed, and it works. And so, we do all sorts of political things now in terms of equity. Like we had a little controversy at the high school promoting de-leveling the 9th grade class recently. And to me, that's not the answer. I don't think you want to deprive our kids of powerful academic experiences by doing this political thing. We think if we do de-leveling, it'll put everybody together, it'll make things better, and then more kids will go into honors classes in the future. We don't have any data that proves that works, but we do have tremendous data that says if you provide them with the kind of support and encouragement that the Calculus Project does, that we have amazing data that says that works. That is the solution to educational equity. That's one big, and it shouldn't be limited to math. Yeah. It should also, first of all, if I had all the money in the world and I was running school systems, I would say the calculus project should begin in grade 4. You agree with that?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I would even say second grade or kindergarten.
And the calculus project shouldn't be the only discipline where we provide that kind of support for kids who historically haven't done well. Let's go to social studies. Let's go to English. Let's go to the world languages. Let's go to science. Okay? And, I don't think it's that complicated. I think you have to have a very clear sense of what works for kids. And the calculus project over many, many years now works for kids. And I'll just throw one little piece of data at you. The first cohort of the calculus project, Brookline High School, we started in 2009, right?
Yeah.
And then they graduated 2014.
Yeah.
And then they all went to college. They all took calculus in the senior year. They went off to college, and we had a reunion. Remember? Of course, you remember. Yeah. We had a reunion 4 years after they left Brookline High. Every one of those 21 kids in the original cohort of the calculus project had graduated college in 4 years. That data is spectacular. And again, you go back when Adrian and I wandered around the halls and we looked at the advanced math classes, and we mainly saw white and Asian kids. We said we got to change that. So Adrian, being brilliant, he was getting his doctorate at the time, used some of the research that he learned about during his doctoral work, and said, this is what we're going to do. And it was called the Calculus Project. So we said, this is what we're going to do. And again, we have data to say that kind of a program works. It can be expensive, but what I always say is that the return on investment is at the schoolhouse. Go back to 4th grade, start the calculus project in 4th grade. It costs a little bit of money. Okay, let's take a look at, this is probably controversial, but let's take a look at central command, central office. Maybe some of the folks up there don't provide a big return on investment for what's most important, for what's most fundamental, for what the schools are all about. And so, I enjoyed manipulating budgets over my life, and part of that manipulation of money says, well, you take it from here and you give it over here. And so I would say all the time, let's invest in the schoolhouse. Let's invest in the teachers who are working with the kids every day. And by the way, some of the kids, especially today, have some issues, social emotional issues. Okay, let's invest in social workers to help them in that area. So I don't think it's that complicated. Maybe some of the things I just said are a little controversial, but I don't care. Because I've done this work for so long, and when you have a lot of experience, you learn stuff. I'm still learning, and so I said what I just said.
Yeah, I would add to that and this sort of where I was talking about students' voice, the relationship. Does every kid feel that they have an advocate in that building? Can they name someone who supports them in that building? If you're going to talk about educational equity, you have to know the kids well. And not everything is going to tell us from a data point what is that child needs support. And I think the other piece is it's also a challenge, right? What's nice about the Calculus Project and other programs that really aim to address some of these equities is that they're willing to challenge kids. Mm-hmm. I think we've gotten very complacent in expecting the kids to deliver what they walked in, but it's how we've grown them. That's the challenge. And yes, that you need that challenge, and you also need that support with that. But if you don't know that child, you can't provide that challenge. You may be able to provide the support, but you won't be able to give that child the rigor that they deserve. And that is ultimately, to me, what makes schools high performing, is when every kid feels that they are being supported, but also challenged in that school.
Can I ask something
Sure.
as a follow-up? Because I'm like a very concrete thinker and I like examples. You were a principal, yes? Remind me of the school you were a principal of?
The Laboratory School of Finance and Technology in the South Bronx.
In the South Bronx, okay. And I think I heard you say a little bit earlier, before we began this forum, that, was it your last year's principal, that there was a 100%
yep.
graduation rate?
Yes. It took us a while to get there, and that's what people have to understand. It does take a lot of time and effort, but if you keep that vision and your goal is to how do we challenge every single child in that school, you can accomplish that, absolutely.
And there was, you said, a college completion rate of 96%?
96% went on to college.
Went on to college.
Yes.
I mean, those are
for the South Bronx, those are
numbers. For anywhere.
to triple the statistics in the neighborhood.
So
but
how'd you do it?
I think it's what my colleague said. It's providing that challenge, but providing it early and backwards planning to what you're trying to achieve. Clear goals and clear way of measuring those goals. And I will say a healthy dose of monitoring. You still have to check in and see if those goals are being met, and supporting the folks who are involved in that. I think was a 10 to 15 year plan that most people are looking at year-to-year plans. And so if you want this vision to occur, if I want that kid to get to calculus and I'm starting in second grade, I better have backwards plan to make sure my goals are aligned to ensure, and that people are on board. That requires, so I agree with Bob cheerleading. I wouldn't call it cheerleading, I call it providing challenge and support. And ultimately, keeping kids focused on what and why you're encouraged them to do these challenging things.
So you were thinking in terms of a 10 to 15 year plan?
I was definitely thinking of more than 10 years, absolutely. At the time I was in the South Bronx, we had test scores at my school. It was actually one of the most dangerous schools in New York City. Chancellor Klein, who had just became the chancellor of New York City when Bloomberg came in, created these newer schools, and this was one school that was considered one of the most dangerous at a middle school level of all schools, and it was a middle school. And so how do you change that? You have to have, because you're trying to convince parents who now distrust the environment, don't feel they're getting what they want to. How do you get them to see that vision along with you? It's a lot of conversations, a lot of relationship building, and ensuring that people have their voice heard. So when Adrian is talking about having those parents on board, that's the game changer. Once you have the parents on board, everything else starts to crystallize, because they're going to hold you accountable to see if you are going to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. And ultimately, I think that's the form of leadership, is to be humble enough to go back and say, although we thought this was working, we might have to tweak this to get that same goal that you want.
So let me ask both of you a question that Dr. Bob said he used to ask teachers when he was roaming the halls of Brookline High. As educators, what do you need to succeed?
Wow. I need a lot. Buy-in and belief.
Yeah.
And that's, I work with a lot of school districts. I work with a lot of educators. I cannot name one school where we've launched the calculus project where 100% of the math department said, yes, we can do this.
Yep.
All kids can take calculus. I end up with maybe about 20%.
20%?
No more than 30 or 40%. So there's a psychology to it. And the thing is, give me the 20%. We got to get quick wins. We can measure growth and performance within the first year to show that it works. Everybody wants to be on a winning team.
Yeah.
I use myself as an example. I hated the Patriots. I grew up in South Carolina. And I moved here, and all of a sudden this guy named Tom Brady started winning. I was like, this is a cool dude, good looking dude, he's a winner. He's a competitor. I'm a competitor. I'm just like, next thing you know, I'm wearing a Patriots hat and I'm cheering and they winning all of these Super Bowls. I didn't care anything about the Patriots. And the thing is that even in Brookline, all of the teachers in the math department did not believe in the students. And here's what happened. I never told this story. Behind the scenes, I had very good relationships with the parents. I emailed the parents and I said, look, the teachers who are working with your children during the summer, during the school year, do me a favor, just send them an email and just say thank you, right? So guess what happened? All of the parents sent those teachers emails, and guess what the teachers did? They shared the emails to the teachers in the math department, and they weren't getting those emails. You know the emails they were getting? Mm-hmm. How could you give my kid an A minus? My kid deserves an A. You mean 1 point away? And so you got Calculus Project parents having potluck dinners.
Yeah.
and saying, I really appreciate you and everything. And then you got this over here, and the teachers are just like, wow, I want to get involved with this and get on this bandwagon. And it took time, kind of like what Ramon was saying with his school. It took time and it took evidence. We're always collecting qualitative and quantitative data to show that the students are learning and they're moving the needle. And then once you have the evidence, it's just like, okay, so what's your excuse?
Yeah.
Because usually when, I do professional development, I'll ask teachers, I'll say, why is it that all of the students, taking calculus, why is it that the demographics of the entire student body are not represented in honors and advanced level math courses? And the reasons they give me are all reasons where they're pointing the finger at the parents or the students aren't doing this or not doing that. They never look in the mirror and say, you know what, maybe I could be doing these things differently, right? That tells me a lot. And so our approach is not to be judgmental, give people grace and give people space to grow. But we just only need a few champions just to get that ball rolling. And I'll say this and I'll be quiet. The most important lesson I learned implementing the program in Brookline was that I cannot be the sole voice of the Calculus
right.
Project. I needed Megan Kennedy Justice and Lisa Redding, 2 white female teachers, to go to the rest of the math department and say, this is the greatest experience of my life. The kids are doing well, and they needed to see that the kids love the teachers. And one of the things I did, I have so many videos documenting the whole transition to implementing the Calculus Project. One of the students, not one of us, was actually, but 2 students who used the word love to describe their feelings towards the math teachers and the Calculus Project. And that's powerful. I don't know too many people can say they love their math teacher.
When we had that reunion, that's what the kids who graduated from college said, our teachers loved us. Okay, I like that. That helps. When you feel like you're loved, you might want to do some extra stuff. Anyway, can I say one thing quick?
No, actually, in a minute. But I did want to hear. I wanted to hear from.
That's okay.
Well, no, it's interesting what Adrian brings up, because I think to a large degree, sometimes people just don't know what success is, or see visions of it for them to aim for that. So when you have something as ambitious as the Calculus Project, and you're trying to double, triple these numbers that are out there, sometimes you have to see it somewhere in order to visualize it. And that's also with our kids, and that's also with our staff. I remember we were doing a project where we were looking at our writing rubric. And we were trying to figure out why, out of a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being a top score, why do we continue to have so many kids scoring 2.5 or 2.7? And it wasn't until teachers started to realize that they didn't have models of what a 3 and a 4 were. They just assumed, and the kids assumed by just reading the rubric that was enough. But the kids had to actually see what a 4 looked like. And sure enough, we started having 4 started to appear. So then we said, why are we only limited to a 1 to 4 scale? What would a 5 look like? And people were like, no, you're asking too much. We already got these kids from 2.5. They wanted to stop. They were like, no, let's see. Let's experiment with this. Sure enough, 5 started to show up. And I think what it proved to the teachers was the limitation weren't the kids. It was us. It was the adults. Because we had a fixed idea of what this was, and we couldn't see beyond that. We couldn't say, what else could we do to both challenge and support students to reach those higher levels? And I think that's where you see a closing of the equity gap, is when you have adults who are willing to both challenge and support, but also provide those models of what this looks like. And I think that's what our kids want. Our kids want to know what it's like beyond the grade, beyond their classmates, beyond. We all want them to see that. How do schools expose their kids to that? That's what it took to move our school across that time, is that I still had to show them glimpses, or what Adrian says, quick wins, glimpse of what success could look like. We'd reach it, and then we'd push the envelope a little more. Reach it and push the envelope. So it was this sense of urgency and this continuous improvement that excited people because they saw success again and again, and it became addictive.
Yeah.
They all wanted it.
Well, just hang on, Bob. But so, coming back to this question of like what you, as a school leader, needed from, I guess it was to be the chancellor, or city educational leaders, so that you could work towards this goal.
Yeah.
What were those things?
I think there were a couple of things. There just wasn't one. I wish it was only one. But I think everything from having some autonomy, I think that was critical, to having ability to not only leverage the talent I thought I had, but leverage the talent of my staff. So some of my best, most successful change in school happened because the staff advocated for those change. And they gave a reason behind it, and they gave support behind it. That opening of autonomy, I think, from my district leader allowed us to move beyond what I think was a typical behavior of a school like that, because that was a standard approach is I manage you, you're supposed to do this and that. And this was about, let me leverage your leadership, your ability to transform people, your ability to move people. I'm going to give you that space to try that so that we can move this school. And I think that took off.
Yeah.
People really got excited about, wow, I could actually try some ideas I had. I could be support, and it was okay if it didn't always work, because kids, just at the end of the day, kids were more excited to be here. Kids felt like somebody was listening to them, and kids felt like at the end of the day, I could be something that maybe I wasn't thinking of being. At least try something to be something different. Where in my neighborhood, I'm always the same person. I'm always Joey from 118th Street. Now I could be, Joey the King, or Joey the mathematician, or Joey the... I get to experiment in school, and that was exciting for me.
I know you want to say something, Bob,
Okay,
but then
no.
But then I have one wrap-up question for you as well.
For me?
Yeah, but you wanted to say something a little bit earlier.
Well, I always have a lot to say. I just want to say, first of all, it is an incredible honor to be with you three. You, Meghna, Adrian, and Ramon, because each of you does your work better than just about anybody else in the world. So I'm just happy to be sitting at this desk with you three. I also want to say one thing. Ramon was the principal of ISHS 223 in the Bronx for 22 years. Adrian Mims worked at Brookline High School for 19 years. I worked at Brookline High School for 22 years. How long have you been at WBUR?
Oh my gosh. More than 20 years.
Yeah, okay. So stable, long-term, steady leadership is incredibly important, because that's the only way that you can build something, because you're there, you're building a family, you're building a staff, you know the community. That's the magic, and that's one thing that I'm hugely concerned about right now in Brookline. We have lost that continuity, that stability of leadership that I was so fortunate to be a part of when I first came here. And I'll just tell a quick story, because I don't want to spend that much more time. Jim Walsh hired me as the head of Brookline High School, okay? And every day around 5:30, he knew I was sitting in my office kind of doing some stuff. He'd call me up. He'd say, hey, Bob, how you doing? Call me up. And then later in his tenure, at 5:30, he'd pull up in front of the high school, he parked there illegally. He ran up the steps and came into my office and plunked down on one of my comfortable upholstered chairs, and we'd have these great conversations. And the culmination of all the conversation was, how you doing? What do you need? How can I help you? And it was so empowering. It was we'd sit around tables at the senior cabinet meetings all the time, and Jim Walsh would look at me and say, he would say,
I don't think the you got to do it to camera.
Say, I love you. I mean, at a regular meeting, and the only time we didn't get along was contract negotiations. When he said, well, Bob, I don't think we can do much for you. I said, you sit around at our regular meetings and tell me you love me, and now you tell me you can't give me any money? I'm out of here. And I walk out the door, and he said, Bob, come back. Anyway, having, and he was a long-term leader, And you guys have been around your places for a long time, and that's what works. That's what we need in Brookline to make that light shine brighter.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? I have one more question for the two of you, and then your last question, okay? Then I got
No,
one more.
I don't have a question. I'm good.
No, I'm going to ask you one last question. You know, it occurs to me that we've been having this conversation of, you know, how do you create schools that help all children thrive? What is equity and how do we achieve it? And we're having this conversation at a time where, specifically regarding equity at the national level, we have, you know, a president who's made it his mission to delegitimize, to put it that way, anything having to do with the word. So there's like political flux. I'm just wondering how you guys think of that, or how to, is there a way to talk about or do things at schools that kind of avoids the or protects the work from the kind of politicization that's been going on? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a very big question there. I think in the history of our school and the work, I honestly try to keep it very localized, because leaders move, leaders change, ideologies change, but I think creating environments of caring, of thriving. That doesn't mean you ignore the politics, but I do think that we need both school communities to operate in what's in the local community as well. Like, some people get caught up in the national agenda and forget what's happening around them. And I think it's very critical that you, although think globally, you focus locally, and what does that look like? And I think every day we can look around and see where we are cut short equity discussions, even in our conversations with each other. I don't think we need to look at the president to see that. I think we could look at it in our local community and see that. And where do we have the representation of our local community to feel that we are invested in equity in the neighborhood, or in our school? Do we, our kids being able to get the programs they need to thrive and educationally close that equity gap? So as much as I love to talk about national politics, I get more concerned that we get distracted and focusing on what's happening around us. Mm-hmm. Are we focused on the neighbor next down the block? Are we focused on, or we're so concerned what's happening so far away from us that we can't even talk to our local people around us? And I think that's why I say it's all about relationships. Was it relationships? And if we're not concerned about what's happening around us, it's very hard to then think about something that's so far away from us.
Yeah. Let me put a little local twist on it, okay? Because I think you're right. Like, there's actually also local versions of this major. I don't even want to call it a debate, but politicization, like, or debate. Because, for example, you said earlier that you know, there's always this concern that pieces of the pie are being taken from some and given to others. But you know, it's like there's genuine concern about, well, not about the calculus project, not about that kind of program, but well, in the name of equity, we're gonna de-level 9th grade English, when at the same time, for any kid who wants to get into some of the AP course, I know we've been focusing on the high school a lot. We have 8K through 8s, and they are just as important. I have a 4th grader right now, but you know, like, for any kid who wants to get into some of the AP courses, they can't. And so it's like, that's what I'm saying, like there seems to be this tension of, like, I keep coming back to, like, what is equity? Because one version of it has been so wildly politicized, and that I think that it's hard to really understand some of the decisions that are made at the school level.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. This is complicated, and you know, like, when I go and have my first conversation with a superintendent or a school district, I'm like, keep all your levels. You know, I'm not coming in here telling you to detrack or any of that stuff. Keep your levels. I come in and I say, hey, I see you got some tracks. We're gonna build some more tracks. But the tracks that I'm going to build are tracks during the summer, which are going to be pathways for students to rise and get into the upper levels. I want the upper levels to stay there, because I believe that the students who have historically been underrepresented, they have a seat in those classes. And I want them to be there. I don't believe that certain students have to lose in order for certain students to win. Everybody can win. And I think what we've been able to show is that when students are given the resources, the same resources that wealthy kids have, right? That they're gonna have some new neighbors in their classroom. And think about this, you know, parents spend anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a year for additional math support outside of school. What the Calculus Project does, it provides math support for students in school, and those students don't have to pay for it. So therefore, we're automatically mitigating that whole issue about, you know, affordability.
Right.
And what's happening? Well, students are able to go into those classes. I will say this, I think the reason why people are taking, this is my opinion, the reason why people are taking a stance and saying that we gotta just have one level and put everyone in the same classroom, I think is more or less out of frustration that they haven't been able to move the needle and get students into the upper levels. So it's just like, hey, this is the easy way to do it. We're just gonna put everybody in the same boat.
Yeah, but that's the
And
opposite of meeting the needs of every student.
I totally agree. And so that's why I'm against that. But my whole thing is that we take a different approach, and this is what I call the manufactured crisis in education, right? So think about course placements. When teachers make recommendations for students, those recommendations are made halfway during the school year. So I'm just gonna give you an example. Let's just say there are 3 math levels. There's basic, there's standard, there's honors. If a student is taking a standard level math class, and for that student to move up to honors, if that teacher says this student needs a B in the class, halfway during the school year, that student could have a C+. So the teacher's not gonna make a recommendation for that student to move up. However, that student can finish the year with an A-. First, how many teachers go back and change the recommendation? And second, even if they do change the recommendation, will the master schedule allow that student a seat in that class? So those are some of the barriers. The other barrier is the criteria that teachers use to make the recommendation. The criteria are always flawed. I have yet to go into a school and I look at the criteria and I say, okay, so what data did you use to come up with this criteria? How do you know that a student getting a B- can't do as well as a student who got a B+? Crickets. No one says anything because they don't have any information. The other problem, I've got to point this out too, that I see in schools, there's too much autonomy in the sense that you can have an 8th grade algebra honors class, you can have 10 sections, you can have 5 teachers who, you know, they're responsible for 2 sections. They all have different expectations and criteria. Imagine this, imagine trying to figure out, aside from Steph Curry, I love basketball, try to figure out who's the second best 3-point shooter in the NBA, given these facts, that sometimes they play with the 3-point line, that's the NBA 3-point line, and then sometimes they play with the high school 3-point line, and then sometimes they don't play with a 3-point line at all. And you look at the data, you can't honestly say who's the best 3-point shooter because there are limitations to the data. So how can we say that this student can't do as well in an honors level course compared to another student in another teacher's class, and they have different criteria? Those are some of the manufactured problems that create this. And so it's an easy fix, I believe, but there's gonna be some tension, but it goes back to the courageous leadership that's needed.
Well, so we went much longer than I'd planned. But what happens is when I'm surrounded by very smart people, I'm just like, wow, I want to hear more. So that's what happened. But my last question is for you, Dr. Bob.
Okay.
Why are you running for school committee now?
I love Brookline. I love the Brookline Public Schools. Spent the best part of my professional life in this school system. And I'm concerned about the dimming of the lighthouse. And I want to contribute my voice to brightening up that lighthouse. I love working on teams. I'll be working with 8 other school committee people, and also working with lots of people in the school system. So I still have a lot of energy. I feel good, and so it's just another gig in my life. I've had a lot of gigs. Here we go. If I get elected, yeah. Please, if you're watching the video, vote early and often.
Not twice, right?
Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much. Ending on a super mature note there. No, but thank you, really, so much, because
Thank you.
we need
Yeah.
this kind. We need this leadership.